Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I will be continuing my series on converting the board game Source of the Nile, and in particular, I'll be talking about how I've started to implement victory points, which are the main way that you know how well you've gone in the game. As you can see, we've set up an expedition, and it's telling us that we are, on the first day, we are 7 miles inland. We have a doctor accompanying us and the usual set of bearers and a scout and guards, etc. But we have this, which is relatively new. There was something similar in the previous video, but it now says you have 16 victory points. And we have gone 7 miles inland, and we've come across a group of warriors, and that has somehow given us 16 victory points. And then if we approach them in a open and friendly manner, let's see what happens. They charge the expedition, we fire our muskets, they surrender, we take some prisoners, we find their village, and we now have only 6 victory points, so we've lost victory points. And now we have the option to forgive our foes and continue on our way, or force the prisoners to serve as bearers. It's said that we find the foe's village. Normally we'd have the option to loot the village, but because we have a doctor with us, we don't have that option. So we have to either force the 2 prisoners that we've got to become extra bearers, or we forgive them and continue on our way. And I think we'll forgive them and continue on our way, which means that we go all the way up to 40. And then we come across another group of warriors, but I might leave it there because I've demonstrated what I wanted to demonstrate. Let's forgive them and continue on our way, and then we end the day with 42 victory points. So let's have a look at why that was happening. So we'll load up the code. Where is it? There it is. So most of this is not, it's not code that's going to be difficult to explain. This is very simple in coding terms what I've done. We have a variable VP, which is our victory points. It starts, of course, as you might expect, at 0. It goes up and down based on particular events. There will be more events that make it go up and down, which I haven't yet implemented, quite a few, but there's some that I'm going to show you today. And coding it is simply a matter of, at the appropriate point, saying set VP equals, or set $VP equals $VP plus 10 or minus 10 or whatever it might be, and recognizing that the points are different depending on what specialists are present. And in fact, that is a major role of the different specialists, that they allow you to get points in different ways. Probably the number one thing that they do, in fact. So let's start by looking at this sort of isolated page, which is victory points, and that's going to explain what I've done so far. And I'll click it on there, and the player will never come across this. This is just a note for myself or for anyone who is looking at the code, at least so far. I might have some sort of document, some sort of player's guide when the game is more ready, but for now it's just notes for myself. And so we have mapping, locals, and battles. And it says that if you discover a river, you get 2 VP per mile, VP being victory points. That's a very common abbreviation in the world of board gaming in particular. 2 VP per mile if doctor or missionary is present, otherwise 1 VP, but only get points if at least 5 miles inland. So the justification for that, why is it at least 5 miles inland? Well, I did say at the beginning of the game, it does say a few miles inland have already been mapped. And so it seemed logical to me that you wouldn't get points for mapping something that people probably roughly already knew. It's only when you go beyond that that you start having new, bringing back new information and therefore getting points. Why is it 2 VP per mile if there's a doctor or missionary present, but otherwise it's 1 VP? Well, they never quite, I don't think they ever say, but the logic seems to be that a doctor is looking for a spot to set up a hospital and a missionary is looking for a spot to set up a mission. And if you have a river, that's a better spot for a mission. And so therefore that's of more interest to the doctor or missionary's sponsors and therefore reflects better on you as an explorer. For a lake, you get 10 victory points. And then we go down here, locals. If when you discover a group of locals, you get plus 20 victory points if there's an anthropologist, otherwise 10. Well, that's obvious. Obviously, an anthropologist is going to be more interested in the university that's presumably sponsoring him or something, are going to be more interested in discovering people. And the last heading we have is battles. If you win a battle, you get plus 10 VP if a journalist is present, minus 10 VP otherwise. The justification for that, again, isn't set out in the rules, but it seems to be if a journalist is present, they can write up a sort of heroic story about how it wasn't your fault and also you're very brave and it's very exciting. Whereas anyone else, you're meant to be sort of, you're meant to be discovering things and kind of bringing the light of civilization. You're not meant to be traipsing around sort of picking fights with people. And so therefore, if you win a battle, people are not going to be impressed with you. You're actually going to lose points because you're sort of perhaps you'll be thought to be sort of reckless or thought to be kind of not diplomatic enough or something like that. And if you lose a battle, you get plus 20 VP if there's a journalist and 0 otherwise. Obviously, that's, again, pretty straightforward. If there's a journalist, they can tell the thrilling tale of your captivity among the savages of such and such or whatever, whatever. They can tell a story that sells well. And we've already discussed this, that if you win a battle and you have the option to force prisoners to serve as bearers, as in if you have prisoners or if you find the village, you get plus 10 VP if you choose not to take advantage. And if you have a missionary, anthropologist and or a doctor, you can't loot the village, but you still get the plus 10 VP for not looting the village, if that makes sense. So in the fiction of the game, you had the choice, but in the actual game, you, the player, don't have the choice. So that's what I've done so far. I won't show you every example of implementing this because it's fairly straightforward. Let's do this one, discovering a group of locals. You get plus 20 VP if the anthropologist is present, otherwise you get 10. So we need to find two things. We need to know where in the code do we know that we've discovered a group of locals, and how do we determine if an anthropologist is present? So the first bit is fairly easy. How do we know when we discover a group of locals? Well, I know because I've coded it and I know roughly what everything does, and I know that the first bit, when you discover a new group of locals, you always have to roll up their strength or randomly generate their strength. So therefore, and I've just noticed that I've made a little mistake there, that should be 20 and 10, not 2 and 1. And I'll explain why it said plus 2 and plus 1 before. So that's where you discovered a new group of locals. How do you determine whether an anthropologist is present? Well, we're using the $P array. The $P array is the one that keeps track of which specialist you have. And all we do is we go here. We look at $C because that's the names of the specialists, but we are using this array $P, which is ones and zeros, to tell us what's in our particular expedition. But in this case, we want an anthropologist, so we count. We say 1, 2, 3. Okay, so P square bracket 3 N square bracket is the one that tells us whether we have an anthropologist. So going back to the relevant page, we say if $P3 is equal to 1, then set VP equals VP plus 20, else set VP equals VP plus 10, and then slash if. So the code is very simple. It's just a matter of finding the right, making sure that you're doing it in the right place and making sure that you've got the right references to specialists. So as I said before, this said +2 and +1, and I actually had it set as +2 and +1, and in the original game, it is +2 and +1. So why have I gone for +20 and +10? Well, the answer is to do with the way that travel works. You'll remember, if you've been following this series, that in the original game, each space represents quite a lot of distance, whereas I am checking every single mile. So if I gave the same number of points for each mile in this game as you got for each space in the original board game, they would be way out of whack with the points that you get for other types of discoveries. In other words, the only points that would really matter would be the points that you get for exploring new territory. The balance would be out. And so what I've done is I've kept the points for new territory the same as they are in the original game. So, for example, well, in fact, there's only one that I've done so far. I intend to keep the points for new territory the same, 2 VP per mile for a river, or otherwise 1 VP, but everything else is multiplied by 10. So instead of +2 VP and +1, you get +20 and +10. And that makes the importance of this type of point roughly the same as what it would. It makes this way of getting points have roughly the same importance in relation to this way of getting points as it does in the original game. Now, of course, I might change it again once we finish the whole game and we're sort of comprehensively testing it. It might turn out actually it is unbalanced, and I might want to change it. But for now, because I've got this general sort of idea that 10 miles in the original game, 10 miles in this game is sort of the equivalent of 1 space in the original game in terms of how whether you check to see if you meet anything, and you check for what happens and roughly how far you should get and that sort of thing. Because I've done that, I've multiplied the points for everything by 10 except for points for new territory. Now, in the original game, and I will implement this as soon as possible, you actually get points for mapping territory as well as for following a river and for discovering a lake. You also get points for mapping different types of territory. But it's quite complicated because it's different for different specialists are present. In the original game, you'll probably recall, you don't have specialists that are present. You have a sort of character type. You are a doctor or a missionary or an explorer or a what they call an ethnologist, which is what we're calling an anthropologist, and so on. Whereas in this version, I've said that there's always the equivalent of an explorer, which is the player character, and then you can choose to bring doctors and missionaries and so on as well, because I thought that might make a more interesting set of choices in terms of giving you more combinations, giving you more options. And the other thing I will say is that I decided for now that the points don't double up. So, for example, you get 2 VP for finding a new part of a river if you're a doctor or a missionary in the original game. And so I had to decide, well, what happens if you have a doctor and a missionary? Do you get sort of 4 points, or do you just get 2 points? Well, I decided to go with, for now, that you just get 2 points. You get the best points rather than getting the combination of everything, because it seems, I suspected it might make it a bit easy to just get heaps of specialists, and then you just start racking up points without going very far. I don't know if that's true, but that's the decision that I've made so far. That you get rather than getting sort of both sets of points, you get the best possible single lot of points. I will say briefly that I also have consolidated. I used to have text in red. I won't go through the coding of this because it's very straightforward, but I used to have some text that was in red and some text that was in white but said testing only. And I was sort of planning to have the red as optional text, i.e. the player could set a variable where that text would be present or not present, and the testing only would represent text that definitely wouldn't be there in the final game. But I've sort of abandoned that idea, so I've consolidated that. There's no testing only messages anymore. It's all just red. It's all just red text. But I've gone into how that works. But I guess I'll go over it just quickly again. I'll show you an example. How do I do it? Maybe I don't know how to do this. All right, let's have a look. Color. All right, so I'll get rid of that. Oh, I see. It's not. Sorry, had a bit of a brain fart. It's not. I thought it was color equals red. I'll type it out separately so it's a bit easier to see. We go span style equals color. Oops, equals color red. Then we have the text. Then we have /span. So all span means is this is the beginning of a set of text, a paragraph essentially, a set of text that has particular characteristics. And in this case, the one of the characteristics is that the style includes that the color of the text, color meaning the color of the text, is red. There's a list of color names that it recognizes. You can also do. I could have also done something like this, where you have a code in hexadecimal, which is to say base 16, where this number is how much red is in it, this one's how much green is in it, and this one is how much blue is in it. You might have heard of the phrase RGB, standing for red, green, blue. That's just a common way of classifying sort of colours in the context of computers. And FF0000, FF is the highest number that you can include, and so this just means the maximum red, no green, and no blue, which is to say a very pure red. So I've turned everything into that. I have also last week I mentioned that I had made a mistake with telling you how many victory points you had, and that is a very common one, which is that you do something like this. This is what I had. You have VP victory points. So that will print the text, capital YOU space HAVE space. Then instead of $VP, it will print the value of the variable $VP space, and then victory points, and then a couple of line breaks. Normally that will work. If you have 5 victory points, it will say you have 5 victory points, and then those BRs will mean that it sort of moves the counter down, the tab down there for the next bit of text. The trouble with that is that what happens if you have 1 victory points? Because we don't say 1 victory points, we say 1 victory point. So the way you can deal with that is twofold. One, don't worry about it, and I've seen a fair few programs that just say you have 0 victory points. The other thing you can do is you can have a less conversational way of expressing it. You can say victory points VP, and then that'll be right, whatever it is. Victory points 0 looks right, victory points, 30, looks right. I prefer not to do that. I prefer to communicate as I would speak if possible. And so I usually, in a science fiction game, I might do it that way because that sort of, I don't know, that feels like a sort of, it feels genre appropriate. But in this particular game where we're trying to have a sort of 19th century feel, it didn't feel right. So I do this slightly long-winded way of doing it, which is if VP is equal to 0, say you have no victory points. If VP is equal to 1, say you have 1 victory point. Else, you have VP victory points. And it's just an unfortunate consequence of English grammar that we have to do this quite long bit of if, else, if, and else to make it sound like the way we would express it in speech. Anyway, as I go forward, I'm going to keep putting more ways of getting victory points. The obvious one that I haven't yet done is you are meant to get points for mapping territory as well as for rivers. So you get points for desert and etc. And it's different depending on what specialists you bring, because different specialists are interested in different terrain. As an example, a botanist would probably be quite interested in a forest, for example. But you do get some points anyway because you are an explorer, and so naturally mapping new territory is what you are setting out to do. But you get extra. Obviously, it would improve your reputation if you had a botanist who was sketching the local wildlife, etc. And as you went. But anyway, for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.